At a dusty auction yard in Montana, a wild golden retriever named Blaze stood chained and snarling. No one dared approach. But when a scarred young woman in a worn army jacket stepped forward, the crowd gasped. She didn't flinch. She simply raised her hand and the dog sat. What they didn't know, that dog had once pulled her from rubble in Iraq, and now she'd come back to save him too. The wind carried a bite that afternoon in Big Timber, Montana, a sharp dry edge that hinted at frost after sunset. The sky was a clean, endless sweep of pale blue above rolling plains, and the sun dipped lower behind the bare ridgelines of the Crazy Mountains. Dust rose in soft curls from the trampled ground of Whitmore Ranch's old auction yard, where makeshift bleachers lined the wooden fence posts filled with locals in worn denim and dusty boots, half curious and half skeptical about the event that was about to unfold. The October air was crisp, laced with pine sap and hay, and the dry crunch of footsteps echoed faintly with each new arrival. At the center of it all stood Hank Whitmore, a man who had once broken wild horses and now broke dogs, or so he claimed. In his early 60s, with a thick gray mustache and the belly of a man who'd long since given up rodeo for bourbon. Hank wore a battered leather hat pushed back on his thinning hair, and a heavy sheepskin coat stained from years of ranch work. His voice was a mix of gravel and pride when he raised it above the murmuring crowd. 5 minutes. That's all I'm offering. 5 minutes with the beast. If you can get him to sit, stay or not tear your arm off, he's yours, free of charge. Behind him, tethered to a heavy iron stake, stood a dog unlike any most had ever seen in this town. Blaze was a golden retriever by breed, but far from the smiling family pet image. He was larger than average, nearly 90 pounds of thick muscle, wrapped in a ragged coat of deep russet gold. His ears alert, eyes feral and distant amber like prairie whiskey. The jagged scar running along his left flank spoke of something violent, healed without care. He was 6 years old, a former military working dog pulled from a war zone, and somehow dumped into the civilian surplus system when no one claimed him. Blaze didn't bark. He growled low, constant like a warning that never ended. And when anyone came too close, he lunged not playfully, but with the precision of something trained to survive. Hank stepped aside with a smirk as the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Don't everyone rush at once. Laughter rippled nervously among the onlookers. They were ranchers, retirees, a few drifters. One man near the back muttered, "Dogs touched in the head." Another woman whispered, "Saw him snap a lead. Trainer's wrist last spring." A teenager beside her nodded eagerly. Yeah, they had to put down another one. Just like him. And then quietly, the mood shifted. From the edge of the crowd, a figure stepped forward, not with hesitation, but with the calm certainty of someone walking into familiar fire. She was young, late 20s maybe, and carried herself like someone used to carrying more than weight. Ellie Harper stood out, not by her appearance but by the way she held herself, straight-backed, chin forward, eyes locked on the dog. She was average height, slender, but hardened with high cheekbones and sun-darkened skin. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a high military-style ponytail that revealed a scar above her right brow, thin but old. Her jacket was a faded military surplus issue. Sleeves rolled halfway up her forearms, revealing a tattoo of a K9 unit badge on her inner left wrist. The boots on her feet were worn and scuffed, but solid, the kind that had seen both desert sand and mountain snow. Hank noticed her too late. She had already slipped between the rails of the fence and into the arena. "Whoa there, miss," he called out. "I ain't responsible if he goes for you, he ain't right." Ellie didn't answer. She knelt on one knee just outside the chain's reach. Blaze's eyes locked on her. He growled, but it sounded different now, softer, uncertain. She didn't move, she didn't speak, not yet, Instead, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a laminated tag, scuffed and cracked but still legible. SSG E. Harper, 3rd Medical Battalion, K9 Handler, ID E K9 117. She laid it on the dirt in front of her. Then, softly, Blaze. The dog's growl cut off mid-rumble. His ears twitched. Ellie's voice barely rose above the wind. "It's me." There was a long pause. No one breathed. Blaze tilted his head slowly, his body tense but not coiled to strike any more. He took one step forward, then another. The chain pulled taut and still. He leaned closer. A sound came from him. Then not a growl or bark, but a whine. High, confused familiar. Ellie extended a hand, palm down, fingers curled slightly. Blaze stepped forward again and lowered his massive head under her palm. She stroked behind his ears, and the moment her fingers touched fur, the dog collapsed. Not in pain, not in fear, but in complete surrender. He pressed his head into her shoulder like a soldier returning home. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Hank's mouth opened and closed without sound. Ellie stood her hand resting firmly on Blaze's back. "He's not dangerous," she said, facing the crowd. "He's traumatized, and he was never yours." "Who are you?" someone asked Ellie Harper. She replied, "I served 2 tours in Iraq as a K9 medic. This dog pulled me from the rubble of a collapsed outpost. We were separated during extraction. I spent 3 years filing paperwork trying to find him. I thought he was dead." Her voice cracked just slightly, then hardened. "He was mine. He still is." The silence that followed was heavy with realization. No one laughed. Now, Hank cleared his throat. There wasn't any identification in his transfer paperwork. Nothing that said he was owned because he was listed as MIA. You bought him in a military auction batch without checking where he came from. Hank looked uneasy, but said nothing. Ellie glanced down at Blaze. The dog's posture had changed, entirely alert, but calm, standing with one paw slightly forward, like he was guarding her. "I came back to Big Timber to help care for my grandmother. I didn't plan on finding Blaze at a public auction, but I'm not leaving without him." She didn't wait for permission. She simply turned and walked out of the ring. Blaze followed her without a leash, step for step as though no time had passed at all. The town of Big Timber hadn't changed much in the 6 years Ellie Harper had been away. The same 2-lane road curved into Main Street lined with squat brick buildings, a faded diner with a flickering neon sign, and a hardware store that hadn't updated its window display since before the Gulf War. The scent of pine and diesel still lingered in the wind, and the mountains still loomed in the distance like silent gods. But Ellie had changed. The girl who'd left in a flurry of anger and camouflage had returned, older, sharper around the edges, and carrying something that couldn't be seen. A quiet heaviness etched into her posture. Blaze lay in the truck bed behind her. His large golden body curled tightly, eyes half-lidded but vigilant. The truck, an old F-150 with chipped paint and a cracked windshield, belonged to her grandmother, and its heater barely worked. Ellie pulled into the gravel driveway of a modest, 1-story home just past the Baptist church. The house had white siding, yellowed with age, a wooden porch sagging at one end, and wind chimes that clinked like glass bones in the breeze. Mabel Harper stood at the doorway before Ellie had even knocked. She was 81, tall and thin, with silver hair always coiled into a soft bun, and wore a pale blue cardigan over a worn floral dress that fell to her calves. Her eyes were a clouded gray, but sharpness flickered behind them when the moment allowed. Once a schoolteacher, Mabel had lived in Big Timber all her life, raising Ellie after her parents died in a car crash when she was 8. But now time had chipped away at her. Some days she remembered everything. Other days she forgot she had a granddaughter. Ellie approached, slowly holding Blaze's leash not for control, but for reassurance. "Hi, Grandma." Mabel squinted the confusion lifting slowly like fog in morning sun. Then her face brightened. "Ellie." She stepped forward and touched her granddaughter's face as if to make sure it wasn't just a memory. "You cut your hair again. I always liked it long." Ellie smiled faintly. Too much maintenance overseas. And this Mabel's gaze dropped to Blaze, who sat politely beside Ellie, tail thumping. "Once he yours." Ellie hesitated. "He was a long time ago." Mabel looked closer, her head tilting. "He looks like he's been through something." Her voice lowered. "Just like you." Inside the house smelled of old books and lavender detergent. Ellie unpacked slowly. Just one duffel bag, a military footlocker, and Blaze's food bowl. Mabel watched her from the recliner, sipping tea from a chipped porcelain cup with roses painted along the rim. "You're staying?" Then she asked. "For now," Ellie said, setting the bowl on the floor. "Someone's got to make sure you eat more than Jell-O and toast." Mabel chuckled softly, but her fingers twitched against the cup, a sign Ellie knew meant her mind was drifting again. "You always were the serious one," Mabel murmured. "Even when you were little. Always carrying around that stuffed dog. What was his name?" Captain Ellie replied, voice soft. "He had one eye." "That's right." Mabel nodded. "You said he watched the monsters while you slept." Ellie turned away before emotion could betray her face. She crouched beside Blaze and ran her fingers through his thick coat. "Monsters come in all kinds of shapes," she whispered. Later that evening, after helping Mabel with her medication, 2 pills for memory, 1 for blood pressure. Ellie sat on the back porch steps with Blaze curled against her side. The sun had dipped below the ridge, and the sky burned orange, fading to dusk. She scratched the space behind Blaze's ear, where a patch of fur still hadn't grown back. "I thought you died," she said quietly. "When the blast hit, I called for you for hours. No one listened. They thought I was concussed." Blaze didn't move, but his eyes remained on her face, unreadable yet present. "You saved me that day. You always did." The front gate creaked, and a man stepped onto the walkway. Ellie straightened slightly. The figure was tall, wearing a deputy's uniform with a windbreaker over it, and he held a grocery bag in one hand. "Evening," he called out, voice gentle. Ellie squinted. Ben Croft was a few years older than Ellie, now a sheriff's deputy. He had dark hair going prematurely gray at the temples, a solid build and a jawline that looked carved from local granite. In high school, he'd been the quiet guy who helped fix people's trucks, but never showed up to prom. He gave Blaze a long look before speaking again. "He the one from the auction?" "Yeah," Ellie said. "His name's Blaze." Ben crouched a few feet away, keeping his body low and non-threatening. "He seems calmer now. He remembers me," Ellie said simply. Ben glanced at her. "Mabel called me yesterday. Said she thought you were coming home. Said you had a dog made of fire and memory." He smiled faintly. "Guess she wasn't wrong. She's still sharp," Ellie said. In bursts. "I brought you both something." Ben handed her the grocery bag, cans of soup protein bars, and a bag of Blaze's old preferred brand of kibble. They kept his military file at the station even after transfer. When I saw the photo, I thought of you. That's why I showed up at the auction." Ellie looked at him surprised. "You did that?" Ben shrugged. "I figured if anyone could handle a dog like that, it'd be you." There was a silence between them, not awkward, but weighted. Old friendships like rusted hinges still swung if you leaned into them gently. "You staying long?" Ben asked. "As long as she needs me." Ben nodded. "If you need anything, let me know. Blaze, too, he's earned it." After he left, Ellie returned inside. Mabel had fallen asleep in her chair, the teacup resting on her chest like a memory she forgot to let go of. Ellie pulled a blanket over her and kissed her forehead. Blaze lay down beside the recliner, guarding her like old times. That night, Ellie lay in her childhood room, posters long on walls, repainted in beige, and stared at the ceiling. Blaze's breathing was soft and steady beside her bed. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm lull her. The war had ended, but healing she knew would take longer. The chill of Montana autumn crept through the slats of the barn like a whisper of warning. At Whitmore Ranch, the morning light scattered weakly through the frosted windows, illuminating clouds of dust in the air. The old wooden structure, once full of the sound of barking and training commands, was eerily silent. Hank Whitmore stood alone by the office window, a mug of black coffee in one hand and a cigarette burning low in the other, untouched. His breath fogged the glass as he stared out toward the training yard, now mostly empty. The echoes of a barking dog haunted the silence, though the source was gone. He hadn't slept well. The headline in that morning's Timber Echo was sharper than any boot spur. Lost War dog recognizes handler at local auction. Big timber. Woman reunites with military K9. The photo stung more. Ellie Harper, face half-shadowed beneath the bill of a faded army cap, crouched beside Blaze. His massive golden frame pressed against her like he'd never left her side. The story was already circulating not just in town but online. Hank had 3 voicemails from a radio station in Billings and one from some animal welfare nonprofit, asking questions about acquisition protocol. He didn't return any of them. Lucas Carmichael's truck kicked up a spray of gravel as it rolled into the ranch's front lot. Lucas was clean-cut in the way that always made Hank suspicious. Tight jeans that had never seen mud cowboy boots scuffed only for style, and a mouth that never seemed to close unless calculating something Hank stepped outside to meet him. "You've seen it," Lucas said, waving the newspaper. "It's already online. People are pissed." Hank pulled a drag from his cigarette and exhaled slow. So you auctioned a decorated service dog in front of a crowd, and now people think this place is run by amateurs, or worse, opportunists. You think that's going to help our pitch to the tourism board? I didn't know the dog was military." Lucas snorted. "Did you bother to find out?" Hank said nothing. Lucas kept going. "There's a video clip floating around. Local kid shot it on his phone. The dog responded to her, sat at her feet, leaned on her like he'd found the center of the earth. You can't manufacture that kind of emotion, but now it's out of your control. You look like the man who tried to sell a veteran her own partner." Hank's jaw tightened. "I never claimed ownership. You claimed control. And now you've lost it." Lucas folded the paper and tucked it under one arm. "We've got a problem. Hank, investors are skittish. If they think this place is going to become a protest site for K9 reform, activists or whatever group jumps on this next, they'll pull funding. I can fix it." Lucas laughed cold. You've spent the last 3 years ignoring every piece of advice I gave you. The only reason we haven't pulled out is because of the acreage." Hank looked back toward the empty kennels, their gates swinging gently in the wind. "Let me talk to her." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You think she's going to just forgive this? That she won't go public with everything she knows about Blaze's past and how he ended up chained in your auction yard like livestock? She's not like that." Lucas shook his head. "You don't know who she is anymore. Hank, you barely knew her before. She left this town because no one looked out for her. What makes you think she'll look out for you now?" Hank didn't answer. Later that day, Hank pulled his truck up to the curb across from Mabel Harper's house. The porch was shaded by a large elm, half its leaves fallen into dry piles that swirled in the wind. He stayed behind the wheel engine, running fingers drumming against the steering wheel. He spotted Blaze first resting on the porch like a sentry, eyes alert, ears perked. Then Ellie stepped outside. She wore a loose flannel shirt over a gray tank top, her blonde hair tied in a messy bun. She moved with a slight limp, subtle but real, like something in her leg still remembered a time it gave out. Her gaze landed on Hank with the wariness of someone who'd been ambushed before. He stepped out of the truck slowly. "Ellie, Hank, I just came by to ask for the dog back." Her voice was quiet but steely. Hank shook his head. "No, not that just to talk." She folded her arms, then talk. Blaze remained motionless, eyes tracking Hank with calm suspicion. He didn't growl, didn't move, but made it very clear who his loyalty belonged to. "I didn't know he had history," Hank said. Finally. "No tags, no records. He came in a lot of 8 others. Most of them weren't even fit to train." Some flinched at a raised voice. Others wouldn't eat. Blaze was different. Strong alert. Too alert, I figured he was mishandled. Ellie's eyes didn't waver. He was in a war zone, not by a handler, but by war itself. Hank looked down at the ground, then back up. "I never meant for him to end up in front of a crowd like that, but things are tight here, the business." He paused. "We're changing direction. Tourist-friendly, less training, more branding. Lucas says people want stories." Ellie's mouth twitched bitterly. "So you thought Blaze could be your mascot?" That was before I knew, Hank said quickly. Then what she asked. "You thought a traumatized war dog would sell cabins to tourists." Hank didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence stretched long. Blaze finally stood, tail stiff, and walked to Ellie's side. She rested a hand on his neck. "I need to get back inside," she said, turning to the door. "Grandma gets confused if I'm gone too long." Hank nodded, chastened. "All right." As he turned back toward his truck, she added quietly, "Next time, maybe ask where the dogs came from before you try selling their stories." He didn't reply, just climbed into the cab and drove away, the gravel crunching beneath his tires like brittle bones. The night fell heavy over Big Timber, cloaking the quiet town in cold shadows and brittle silence. The moon, half draped in clouds, cast a silver sheen over the Harper household. Inside, the soft creak of old wood floors echoed under gentle footsteps. Ellie Harper moved barefoot from room to room, like a ghost of herself unable to sleep. The house had always been quiet, but now it seemed too quiet, like even time had paused to let the past breathe. In the living room, Mabel Harper sat curled in her recliner, a knitted blanket pulled to her chest, and a forgotten crossword puzzle resting on her lap. Her eyes were closed, but not in sleep. She was listening. Ellie watched her for a moment, then crossed the room and sat beside her on the edge of the old couch. Blaze lay stretched out on the rug tail, thumping once in greeting before settling again. Mabel opened her eyes slowly. "Can't sleep." Ellie shook her head. Too many echoes. The old woman smiled faintly. Her white hair was loose around her shoulders, her face soft and pale in the lamplight. "It's always loudest when the world is quiet." Ellie looked at her hands, then the dog, then back again. "Do you remember what happened to me over there?" Mabel tilted her head. "In the war." Ellie nodded. Mabel reached for her tea, now gone cold. "Some of it. Bits and pieces. You sent letters when you could. Called sometimes. But I always heard what you didn't say, more than what you did." Ellie leaned back. "It was spring when it happened, Iraq. We were near the Zagros Range. My unit had just finished a sweep through a network of caves used by smugglers. Blaze and I were leading recon. He always went first nose, low body, tight ears, forward like radar." She glanced down at him. Blaze stirred slightly, his ears flicking at the sound of her voice. His fur shimmered gold under the low light, though a dull patch on his flank marked the place where a piece of shrapnel had once torn into him. We got a heat signal. Ellie continued. I radioed it in, then gave Blaze the silent command to search. He went. I followed 10 steps in the cave. Mouth. Detonated. She paused, her throat tightening. I remember fire. Then darkness. My ears wouldn't stop ringing. I could smell smoke, dust, blood. I thought I was buried alive. She swallowed. And then something warm pushed against my ribs. Blaze. Somehow he was still there, nudging me, whining, licking my face. Mabel listened without interrupting, her eyes glassy. He dragged me out, pulled me by my vest until help came. Then Ellie blinked hard. Then another blast went off. They told me later the back tunnel collapsed. No one saw him again. Blaze's eyes opened, fixing on her with a look that wasn't human, but wasn't entirely animal either. A silent confirmation. Ellie reached down and brushed her hand through his fur. I thought he died in that second explosion. For years, I lived with that dreamed. Mabel reached out with her gnarled hand and laid it gently on Ellie's knee. But he didn't. No, Ellie whispered he survived. He found his way back. The silence lingered full of more than words. Then Mabel said softly, "Not everything we love stays lost." Ellie looked at her surprised. Mabel's gaze was distant, like she was seeing a memory behind the air itself. Sometimes the Lord sends back what we can't let go of, but not how we expect. Not in dreams, not in old photographs. Sometimes, she said, voice trembling just a little. He sends it back as a miracle, one with 4 legs and a bark. Ellie laughed softly, tears she didn't know she'd been holding, slipping down her cheek. That's a pretty big miracle. Mabel smiled, and for a moment she seemed entirely herself. He came back to you for a reason. Ellie nodded, unsure whether to agree or admit how deeply that idea terrified her. Later, long after Mabel had fallen asleep again, and Blaze was curled at the foot of the bed, Ellie sat at her old writing desk. The drawers were still full of childhood sketches, old birthday cards, and the tiny plastic sheriff badge Ben had given her when they were 10. She lit a single candle, more out of ritual than need, and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. She began writing slowly, painfully, to Sergeant Blaze, K9 117, from Sergeant Ellie Harper. Jig were not done yet. A gray wind swept over Big Timber as the town gathered beneath the faded flag that fluttered from the pole outside Town Hall. The sky was thick with low clouds, the kind that pressed down like a warning. Inside the modest wood-paneled meeting room, the buzz of quiet conversation filled the air with tension. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of curious locals, many in fleece jackets and mud-smeared jeans, others in Sunday-best attire, as if the debate ahead were a trial rather than a council vote. At the front sat 5 council members behind an aging oak table. Mayor Ruth Granger, tall and pragmatic with iron-straight white hair. Councilman Curtis Finch, a farmer with skin like worn leather and a grudge against anything that raised taxes, and 3 others, young, nervous, shifting in their seats. In the far corner stood a portable coffee machine next to a table of half-stale cookies. But all eyes were drawn to the 2 people standing on opposite sides of the room. On one end, Ellie Harper stood straight-backed, her military file tucked neatly into a manila folder. She wore no uniform, but her stance said everything, a soldier still. Her blonde hair was tied back tightly, her gray jacket clean and pressed. Blaze sat beside her alert and poised his golden coat brushed to a muted shine. He didn't bark or pant. He watched. On the opposite side, Lucas Carmichael. The consultant from Bozeman leaned slightly against the podium with a relaxed smile. His crisp navy blazer and polished shoes screamed outsider. His briefcase sat open beside him like a weapon ready to be drawn. Behind him sat Hank Whitmore, eyes tired, jaw clenched, dressed in a weathered ranch coat that somehow made him look smaller than he had the day before. Mayor Granger rapped her gavel. "Once we're here to hear arguments regarding proposed zoning changes to Whitmore Ranch, which, if passed, would allow for commercial redevelopment. We'll also be reviewing citizen petitions objecting to the treatment and sale of a registered military working dog during a recent livestock auction." Lucas rose smoothly. "Madam Mayor, members of the council, thank you for your time. What we're proposing is an opportunity: jobs, tourism, revitalization. The ranch has the acreage and proximity to Glacier trails to become a premier destination. The Blaze incident was unfortunate, yes, but it was a clerical mishap. No malice, no negligence. My client has offered to compensate all parties." He smiled as though the matter were already solved. Then Ellie stepped forward. "I'm not here for compensation." The room quieted. Even the mayor leaned slightly forward. "I'm here because Blaze is not a mishap. He's a war veteran, a trained military working dog, serial number K9117, attached to the 3rd Medical Battalion, Kandahar Sector." She opened her folder and handed copies of his discharge file to the clerk. "He served 3 years, completed 47 missions, and saved 5 lives, including mine. He was listed as missing in action following an explosion that leveled our forward station." Councilman Finch cleared his throat. "And what proof do you have that this particular dog, is yours?" Ellie stepped to Blaze's side. She didn't speak. Instead, she raised her right hand and curled her fingers in a pattern, sharp and distinct. Blaze's posture changed instantly. He rose, pivoted, and dropped into a perfect heel position. Another motion from Ellie, and Blaze sat raised one paw, then lay flat. The sequence was smooth, clean, and clearly rehearsed over years. She whistled once, 3 sharp notes. Blaze crawled 10 feet forward on his belly, turned and returned to her side. No one in the room spoke. "Those are military signals," Ellie said calmly. "Nonverbal commands used in combat zones to reduce noise signatures. They're taught only to dogs trained for military service, and to their handlers, Blaze wouldn't respond to them unless I was his handler." The room exhaled, as if remembering it had lungs. Councilwoman Dana Morales, a retired schoolteacher with kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice, leaned forward. "What do you want?" "Miss Harper, I want Blaze to stay with me," Ellie replied. "I want this council to deny the rezoning until a full investigation into the treatment of former service animals at Whitmore Ranch is conducted. And I want our community to remember that healing doesn't come from turning our history into tourist bait." Lucas scoffed softly but didn't interrupt. Hank shifted, then stood slowly. All eyes turned to him. "I didn't know who he was," he said quietly. "Didn't know she was back in town. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have asked more questions. But I didn't, and that's on me." He didn't look at Lucas, and he didn't look at Ellie. Just the floor. Mayor Granger tapped her pen once. "The council will deliberate privately. We appreciate everyone's statements. This meeting is adjourned until further notice." As chairs scraped and murmurs resumed, Ellie reached down and touched Blaze's head. He nuzzled her palm. She felt Ben Croft's hand briefly on her shoulder as she turned. He'd been sitting quietly in the back out of uniform, but very much present. "You did good," he said. "I just told the truth," Ellie replied. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the maple leaves that clung stubbornly to their branches. Ellie looked up at the town hall sign, then down at Blaze. "You ready to go home?" He gave a short, soft bark. The sky over Big Timber hung heavy with the pale light of late afternoon clouds rolling in low, like waves ready to break. It was the kind of sky that made you believe something important was about to happen, the kind that warned of revelations too long buried. Inside the town's modest administrative office, Once a post office, now half legal archive, half municipal hub. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their flickering casting long shadows on the papers, spread across Travis Hale's desk. Travis was 35 now, broad-shouldered and soft-eyed, with a jawline shadowed in perpetual stubble and chestnut hair that had never quite figured out how to lie flat. He wore a flannel shirt under a brown wool vest and had the look of someone who belonged equally behind a desk and on horseback. He had once been the kid who won the state history bee and got teased for it, until he decked the quarterback for laughing at Ellie Harper's black eye. He'd been protective of her then, and somehow, despite law school in Missoula and a near marriage that ended in a split custody agreement over a dog, he still was. Now he sat back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes on the screen before him. This doesn't look good. Ellie sat across from him, elbows on the desk, Blaze resting at her feet like a sentinel made of muscle and memory. She wore her old army jacket again, sleeves pushed up to reveal the narrow white scar along her forearm, a souvenir from another life. "What do you mean?" she asked. Travis turned the monitor slightly. "This," he said. "Tapping a PDF is a grant application. Whitmore submitted last year. It's for a rural redevelopment initiative. One line item stands out: therapeutic animal training program. Initial canine acquisition costs, the amount listed." He glanced at her. Exactly what the Army charged to auction off. Blaze's lot, Ellie's brow furrowed. But that's a private auction. They were surplus dogs declared unfit for duty. Travis nodded right. But according to the military logistics code, when animals are decommissioned, they can only be sold under the condition that no public funds are used unless it's a government-affiliated agency or non-profit, providing rehabilitation or sanctuary. Whitmore used town redevelopment funds, technically taxpayer dollars, under the pretense that the dogs were for a PTSD therapy program. No license, no certification, no oversight. Ellie stared at the screen, her stomach turning. So Hank lied to get the grant, used the money to buy Blaze, and then tried to flip the ranch into a resort. Travis leaned forward. Exactly. Which means not only was Blaze improperly obtained, but Whitmore may have committed fraud. If we bring this to the council, it's not just about the dog anymore. It's about misappropriation of public money. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the soft jingle of Blaze's collar. As he shifted, Ellie exhaled slowly. "I don't want to destroy him, Travis. I just want Blaze safe. I want the truth known." "You're not destroying him," Travis said gently. He did that to himself. "You're just turning on the light." She nodded. Then her voice softened. "Thank you for helping me." Travis gave a half-smile, the kind she remembered from a time when the world was simpler, and all they worried about was curfew and where to sneak their first beers. Always, they sat in silence for a beat too long. Something unspoken passed between them. Familiar but heavier now, shaped by years, and war and lives that had gone in different directions. Later that evening, as Ellie walked back toward her grandmother's house, the wind had picked up and scattered pine needles across the gravel road. Blaze stayed close to her leg head, low, his gait slow but steady. She paused at the gate and looked up at the stars just beginning to appear. Inside, Mabel was humming in the kitchen, forgetting half the melody and inventing the rest. Ellie felt the weight of truth pressing against her ribs, not just about Blaze or Hank, but about the years she'd lost. And maybe about the parts of herself she'd buried too deep. Back at the office, Travis closed his laptop and leaned back. He looked at the photo pinned on his bulletin board, 3 high school kids grinning under the Friday night lights, arms slung over each other's shoulders. He touched Ellie's face in the photo gently, then turned off the light. The morning sun broke through the clouds like a quiet promise. Big Timber was still cold, but the frost on the fields behind Whitmore Ranch was beginning to thaw. The earth softened beneath the sun's touch, and for the first time in a long while, so did Hank Whitmore's heart. He stood alone in the old training yard, his gloved hands resting on the top rail of the fence that hadn't been painted in years. Across the field, the barn doors hung half open, swaying gently in the breeze. The place looked tired. He did too. The council's decision had come down the previous evening. Zoning proposal withdrawn, pending investigation. Travis Hale's findings were now a matter of public record. The town paper had printed a respectful but firm headline. Public funds misused in ranch acquisition investigation ongoing. No formal charges had been filed yet, but the blow to Hank's reputation had landed clean and deep. And yet strangely, he didn't feel anger. Not toward Ellie. Not even toward Travis. The truth had a way of stripping you down to the studs, but sometimes you needed to be gutted to rebuild. A sound behind him drew his attention. It was Ellie walking across the field with Blaze at her side. She wore a simple green jacket, jeans tucked into scuffed boots, and a gray beanie pulled low over her ears. She moved with a calm purpose now, like someone who'd stopped running from herself. "I came early," she said as she reached the fence. "Didn't think you'd be here. I couldn't sleep," Hank replied. "Place doesn't feel right unless I see it first thing." They stood quietly for a moment. Blaze sitting between them, his head swiveling like a sentry. "I came to say thank you," Ellie said. "For not fighting the ruling. For not making it worse. I made enough of a mess as it is," Hank replied. "Maybe it's time someone else decided what this place becomes." She hesitated. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something." He raised an eyebrow. "What if we didn't shut it down?" Hank blinked. "You're kidding." "No," she said firmly. "Not as a resort, not for profit. But what if we made it into something real? Something needed. A sanctuary for dogs like Blaze. For veterans. For kids, even. There's land here, space infrastructure. You just need people who give a damn, and what makes you think the town would support it?" "They already do," she said. "Travis is in, so is Dana Morales. Ben Croft's willing to volunteer weekends, and me." Hank stared at her. "You'd stay?" She nodded. "Not forever, maybe, but long enough to build something that lasts." He rubbed a hand across his chin. "And you think I deserve to be part of it? I think redemption isn't something you get. It's something you work for." He chuckled, then sobered. "I'd need to hand over ownership. Town probably wouldn't allow me to hold a leadership role after the audit." "I don't want to own it," Ellie said. "I want to build it for them." At that, Blaze gave a soft bark as if agreeing. By week's end, the old Whitmore Ranch was no longer just a name, it had become a vision. Travis drew up the new paperwork, shifting the land into a non-profit trust. Ellie took over daily operations. Volunteers arrived with paint buckets and shovels, the community perhaps needing to heal as much as the dogs rallied around the project. And Hank, though not in charge, was always there, repairing fences, fixing stalls quietly, answering questions when someone didn't know which gate latch stuck in the cold. The first rehab dog arrived on a Wednesday, a brindled Belgian Malinois named Echo, missing her front left paw, but fierce-eyed and sharp-eared. She limped from the transport crate and stood nose to nose with Blaze. No growl, just a nod of kinship. Ellie started training sessions again. Not obedience, but trust-building. Travis helped build a new kennel run, working shirtless on hot afternoons and sharing sandwiches under the shade of the old pine trees. Their laughter was quieter now, more grown up, but no less warm. And Mabel, though her body weakened, found a new rhythm. Every morning after breakfast, she sat near the porch with her worn box of pastels and sketch pad. She drew Blaze over and over, sometimes realistic, sometimes almost mythical, with wings and halos, and American flags waving in the background. When Ellie asked why, Mabel simply said, "Because memories fade unless you give them somewhere to live." One afternoon, a local news crew showed up. Ellie spoke softly on camera about Blaze, about trauma, and about healing. The segment aired that Sunday evening across Montana, and by Monday, emails were already coming in, offers to foster donations, messages from veterans who wanted to visit. One night, Ellie found herself standing in the middle of the field where the first auction had taken place. Blaze sat beside her watching the stars. She reached down and scratched behind his ear. "We're not done yet," she whispered. And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. The morning sun bathed the foothills of Big Timber in a golden hue, as if the land itself were holding its breath in reverence. The breeze carried a quiet scent of pine and hay, and beyond the ridge snow still clung to the tallest peaks of the Absaroka Range. In the open field just behind the refurbished barn of Harper Haven, folding chairs had been arranged in careful rows. A white canvas banner stretched between two wooden posts read in simple letters, "First Training Day, Harper Haven for Veterans and Dogs." Ellie Harper stood at the edge of the field watching as people arrived, veterans from nearby counties, families of handlers, volunteers, curious townsfolk, and even a few retirees who simply wanted to help walk dogs or fill water bowls. She wore a fitted olive green work shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hair braided back beneath a tan ball cap embroidered with the Haven's logo. A silhouette of a woman and dog standing side by side beneath a star. Blaze sat beside her now, 9 years old, his muzzle graying at the edges, but his posture as proud and alert as ever. He wore a soft leather collar with a silver badge-shaped tag. On it were etched the words K9 on 17, still on duty. As Ellie scanned the crowd, her eyes landed on a familiar figure just beyond the equipment racks. Travis Hale, tall, calm, wearing a navy flannel over a clean white shirt, was walking toward her, a warm smile tucked beneath the line of a carefully trimmed beard. In his hand was a simple blue velvet box, but Ellie didn't notice that yet. Instead, her attention was momentarily drawn to a sound of laughter near the barn. Mabel sat beneath the shade of an old cottonwood tree, wrapped in a soft quilt, and propped in a wheelchair that Travis had helped modify to handle the rough Montana terrain. Her white hair had thinned, and her cheeks had grown gaunter, but her eyes clear and blue, as a summer lake sparkled with pride. Beside her stood Dana Morales, now a full-time program coordinator at the Haven, handing out clipboards and orientation packets. Dana's hair had gone fully silver, but her energy had only sharpened. She wore hiking boots and a pencil skirt, a strange combination that somehow worked for her, practical, yet prepared to argue down anyone who questioned her schedule. Also nearby was Echo, the one-pawed Malinois who had arrived broken and mistrustful just a year ago, now tail-wagging as she demonstrated obstacle drills for a group of teenage volunteers. The boy guiding her, Aiden, was a 16-year-old who had lost his father, a Marine, to PTSD. His bond with Echo had changed both their lives. Ellie took a deep breath and stepped to the small platform they'd built under the flagpole. A hush fell over the group as she raised the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," she said, voice steady but filled with emotion. "When this began, it was just me, a dog, and a lot of memories I didn't know what to do with. But somewhere in that silence I found people. People who had lost things too, brothers, sisters, dogs, parts of themselves. And somehow we've built something here, not perfect, not easy, but real." She glanced at Blaze, who looked up at her with quiet affection. "This place isn't just for healing dogs. It's for healing people too. For reminding us that no matter how far we've fallen, no one is beyond help. Not a handler, not a soldier, not a dog who was once labeled too broken to save." The crowd broke into applause. Gentle, respectful, but heartfelt. Ellie stepped down, and as the guests turned toward the kennels and training stations, Travis approached her. "Nice speech, Sergeant," he said with a grin. She rolled her eyes. I hate speeches. You did fine. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out the small box. But I've got a shorter one. Ellie stared at it, eyes widening slightly. He dropped to one knee, not ceremonious, just honest. I don't have much to offer, but I've got loyalty. A full set of tool belts and no intention of running from anything ever again. I love you, Elle. Always have. I don't want to spend another year wondering, what if Blaze wagged his tail once, as if offering approval? Ellie didn't cry. She'd done enough of that in her life. But she did smile, deeply and completely. You're really proposing to me at a dog sanctuary launch. He shrugged. Seemed like the right place. This is where everything started again. She nodded and reached for the box. Then yes, of course. Yes. Travis rose and kissed her, and the world just for a breath felt whole. From under the cottonwood, Mabel watched them. She wasn't drawing today, just sitting with her hands folded in her lap, her face lit by the golden light that filtered through the leaves. When Ellie and Travis approached, she reached out and gripped their hands. Told you, she whispered, her voice, papery but fierce. God still sends us miracles. Sometimes they just walk on 4 legs. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come as lightning from the sky or voices in the wind. They arrive on 4 legs with a scarred heart and gentle eyes waiting to be seen. This story wasn't just about a dog or a soldier, but about all of us who have carried wounds too deep to speak and the quiet sacred grace that finds us anyway. Ellie's journey and Blaze's return remind us that God's timing is rarely what we expect, but always what we need. What was once broken can be made whole. What was once lost can find its way home. Not through grand gestures, but through love, loyalty, and faith that healing is still possible. In our daily lives, we may walk through silence, through grief, through days that feel like they'll never end. But maybe we are being prepared for a second chance, for a door we didn't see before, for a whisper from God saying, "You are not alone." If you've ever been touched by a story like this, if you believe in the power of second chances and redemption, in the unseen hand of grace, I invite you to share this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. And if this story stirred something in your heart, take a moment to write Amen below. Not just as a word, but as a prayer for those still waiting for their miracle. May God bless you and the ones you love. May He guide every broken spirit back to warmth, and may every lost soul, human or animal, find their way home